She was 24 years old. She had $87 in her pocket, a worn leather satchel on her shoulder, and a small hammer wrapped in a wool scarf at the bottom of it. That hammer had belonged to her father. It was the only thing left of him. The only thing nobody could take. They had taken everything else. The house, the forge, the life she had built inside those walls, nail by nail, year by year, standing in the doorway of her father's workshop, watching fire turn iron into something useful. Gone. All of it. Signed away in a parlor that never felt like hers, handed over in a thin envelope by a man who looked at her the way you look at furniture you no longer need. $87. That was what she was worth to him. So she spent it. Every last cent. On a patch of cracked alkali flat 5 miles outside Pio, Nevada, and the broken-down stagecoach that sat rusting in the middle of it. The whole town called her a fool. They said the land was worthless. They said the coach was firewood. They said a girl alone in the desert with nothing but a hammer and a handful of bills had no business calling herself a landowner. They were wrong. Because behind a false wall in that rusted wreck hidden for 11 years by a dead man who never stopped believing the truth deserved a witness was a secret that would change everything. This is the story of Calla Marsh and what she built from nothing. The Iron Witness. Part 1. The Wreck on the Flat. She was 24 years old and she owned nothing. Not the house, not the forge, not the 7 years she had spent inside those walls learning how to be invisible. Not the dress she was wearing technically, because even that had been bought with his money. And Roland Vane had made sure she understood the difference between what was given and what was earned. She had the satchel. She had $87. She had a small hammer wrapped in a wool scarf at the bottom of the bag. Her father's hammer. Hickory handle, hand-forged head, balanced so perfectly it felt like an extension of the arm rather than a tool. Edmund Marsh had made it for her on her 12th birthday, shaped the handle himself to fit the exact width of her grip, and handed it to her across the work table with grease still on his fingers and something quiet and proud in his eyes. "Some folks have a mind for numbers, Mabel," he had said. Calla. He always called her Calla, not Mabel, because her full name was Callahan, and Edmund thought full names should be used when they were beautiful, and Callahan Marsh was a beautiful name for a girl who was going to need a strong one. Some folks have a mind for words. You have a mind for how things fit together. That's a rare and honest thing. She was 12 years old and she did not fully understand what he meant. She understood now. She stood in the middle of the Nevada desert 5 miles outside a silver boom town called Pio, and she looked at the stagecoach. It listed to the left, badly. The rear wheel on that side had collapsed entirely. Spokes splintered outward like the ribs of something broken. The iron tire warped and sunk into the cracked earth. The other 3 wheels stood technically, but the wood had dried and cracked until the grain showed white. The driver's box was open to the sky, the leather seat split and curling at the edges, the brake lever rusted into its bracket at an angle that suggested it had not moved in years. The paint was gone, stripped by sun and wind and time down to bare wood in patches, with just enough of the original deep red surviving in the sheltered joints and corners to tell you what it had once been. Wells Fargo and Company. The lettering on the door was a ghost. Gold leaf faded to a suggestion. A Concord coach. She could see that immediately. Her father had worked on dozens of them. She knew the egg-shaped body, the thorough braces, the particular way the iron fittings were shaped at the corners. She knew the builders in Concord, New Hampshire had sent their coaches around Cape Horn to serve the West, and she knew that a well-built Concord was constructed to last 40 years of hard road if someone cared for it. Nobody had cared for this one. For a long time. Clem Doherty was still sitting on the wagon seat behind her, the reins loose in his hands, watching her the way you watch someone standing too close to the edge of something. Clem was a big, quiet man with a sun-worn face and a habit of saying exactly as much as was needed, and not one word more. He had driven her out here from the edge of town after she showed him the land notice. He had not said anything the whole 5 miles except to point out once that the road got soft near the creek crossing. Now he said, "You sure about this, miss?" Not a question, an observation. "I'm sure," Calla said. "That's a lot of nothing for one person. I've had a lot of nothing before." He looked at the coach. He looked at her. He nodded once with the slow certainty of a man who has decided to respect a decision, even if he doesn't agree with it. clicked his tongue at the mules, and the wagon rumbled away down the flat road. She was alone. The desert settled around her like a held breath. She looked at the stagecoach for a long time without moving. The sun was high, and the alkali flat reflected it back in a white haze that made the air ripple at the edges. Nothing grew out here except greasewood. Sparse, hardy, unglamorous. Plants that had simply decided to live in impossible conditions and had done so without complaint. She walked toward the coach. She ran her hand along the side panel. The wood was rough under her palm, hot from the sun, but beneath the roughness she could feel the quality of it. Ash and oak, seasoned, built to last. She pressed her fingers against the iron fitting at the lower corner, pitted with rust, but solid. A man who understood his craft had forged this iron. Her father would have respected the work. She pulled open the passenger door. The hinges groaned in a way that sounded like protest. The inside smelled of dust and mice and the particular dry emptiness of a place that had been abandoned long enough for everything living to leave. The bench seats were shredded. Horsehair stuffing spilled out in yellowed clumps. The ceiling was mapped with water stains. Anyone else would have seen firewood. Calla saw the frame. She saw the honest joinery at the corners, the way the undercarriage was braced, the enduring quality of the wood beneath the rot of the surface. She climbed up to the driver's box and sat in the split leather seat and put her hands where hundreds of other hands had held the reins, and from that height she could see her entire property, 1 acre, flat and pale and very, very quiet. Home. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the 2 weeks after her mother died, alone in her small room in Roland Vane's house with her face turned toward the wall so he would not hear. She had cried until there was nothing left, and then she had put the feeling somewhere deep and closed the door on it. She was not sure she would ever open that door again. For now there was work to do. She had not planned to buy land in Pio. She had not planned anything. That was the honest truth of it. When Roland Vane handed her the thin envelope and told her she had until the end of the week, she had walked upstairs, sat on the edge of her narrow bed, and experienced for approximately 4 minutes the particular blankness that comes when the life you were surviving inside suddenly ends, and there is nothing on the other side of it. Then she got up and packed. She did not take much. A few changes of clothes, the small leather Bible her mother had given her that she did not read but could not leave, a wool blanket, her father's hammer. She did not take the photograph of her parents from the mantelpiece. That mantelpiece belonged to Roland now, along with everything on it. She did not take her mother's good dishes or the lace tablecloth or the small silver pin her mother had worn every Sunday. Those things were in a house that was no longer hers, and she would not steal from a thief. There was a difference. She knew the difference. She carried the satchel out the front door before dawn. She did not look back at the forge. She could not look at the forge. Edmund Marsh had built that forge with his own hands 22 years before Calla was born. He had sunk the foundations himself, laid every stone of the chimney, hung the bellows, set the anvil. He had run it for 31 years, and his reputation had spread from Elko to Carson City, not because he was the only blacksmith in the region, but because he was the best. He could forge anything: a delicate gate hinge, a complex iron bracing for a conquered undercarriage, a perfectly balanced hammer for a 12-year-old girl with small hands and a mind for how things fit together. She had always imagined going back to it, relighting the fire, hearing the bellows breathe again. Roland had sold it to Harlan Vane and Associates. She had seen the name on the deed of sale when Roland handed it to her in the parlor. She had read it and felt something cold move along her spine and had not known why. She did not know Harlan Vane personally. She knew the name the way everyone in Nevada knew the name. A state senator, well-regarded, ambitious, a man described in the newspapers as having vision and the kind of quiet authority that got things done, Roland's cousin. She had set the deed of sale down on the parlor table and given Roland a nod and walked upstairs and thought about it while she packed. There was nothing to think about. It was a legal transaction. Roland owned the forge. Roland sold the forge. That was the end of it. She told herself that. She kept telling herself that for 2 weeks on the freight wagon from Carson City, sleeping on a hard plank between barrels of salted fish and crates of mining equipment, while the mules plodded along at the pace of everything inevitable. Clem Doherty drove and said nothing. The desert unrolled in shades of brown and gray. On the 7th day, she saw a notice pinned to the wall of a freight office at a crossroads town. 1 acre, level ground, 5 miles west of Pio. Includes abandoned coach. $80. She stood in front of that notice for a long time. She thought about her father, how he had worked on Concord coaches her whole childhood, how he had known their construction the way most people know their own faces intimately and without having to look, how he had pressed her small 12-year-old hand against an iron fitting once and said, "Feel the weight of that." Someone made that. Someone thought about every part of that. She bought the land that afternoon, sight unseen, $80, 7 left, and the notice folded in her pocket. Clem thought she was a fool. He did not say so, but she could tell. The first week was hard, in the specific way that only genuine physical hardship is hard, which is to say it was not dramatic. There was no dramatic moment. There was just the relentless accumulation of difficulty. Hauling water from the creek a mile away, 2 buckets at a time, the blisters on her hands from the bucket handles on top of the calluses already there from her father's forge. The problem of shelter, when the shelter was a broken-down coach with no proper door seal and a driver's box open to the sky. The problem of food when you have $7 and the nearest store is 5 miles away. The problem of a fire at night when the temperature dropped and the desert became a different country entirely. Cold and vast and indifferent. She bought flour beans bacon and a small cast-iron skillet. She set up a lean-to against the shaded side of the coach using a canvas tarp she found folded under one of the bench seats, stiff with age but intact. She started working. The broken wheel was beyond repair. She could see that. The hub might be salvageable, but the spokes were gone, and the iron tire had warped in a way that meant it needed to be reforged, not bent back. She did not have a forge. She did not have a workshop. What she had was her father's voice in her memory, precise and patient, telling her that a wheel is only as strong as its weakest joint, and the weakest joint is always the one you did not look at carefully enough. She looked at everything carefully. She spent the first week making a complete accounting of what she had and what she needed. Every fitting, every board, every inch of the undercarriage. She ran her hands over the coach the way her father had taught her to assess a piece of work, starting with the overall structure and moving inward looking for what held and what had given way. She tapped the panels, listening to the difference between solid and compromised wood. She tested the remaining wheels, putting her weight against them, checking for play in the axle mountings. The coach was better than it looked. Most things were. She noted everything in a small journal she had bought with 15 cents of her remaining money. Names of parts, conditions, what would be needed. The kind of list her father had kept in his shop ledgers, meticulous and unsentimental, because sentiment did not help you when you were 3 parts short of a complete job and the stage line needed the coach back by Thursday. On the 9th day, during a dust storm that turned the sky a uniform dull orange and made breathing complicated, she cleaned out the rear boot. She had been putting it off. Not for any particular reason. It had simply been lower on the list than the more urgent problems of water and food and shelter. Now the storm had made work outside impossible, and the boot needed doing, and she had her broom and a rag and nothing else to do. She swept the layers of dust and debris out onto the ground. Ancient mouse nests, the desiccated husks of insects, a broken piece of leather strap probably from the original luggage restraints, a single rusted nail. She swept and swept until the boot was empty and the dust motes drifted in the thin shaft of light through the open hatch. Then she started tapping the walls. Her father had taught her this too. Checking for rot, checking for insect damage. You tapped and you listened and the wood told you what it was hiding. Sidewalls. Solid. Floor. Solid. Back wall. Solid. Front wall. The one that backed against the passenger cabin. Thud. 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 Solid. 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 And then near the bottom right corner, about 8 inches from the floor, talk. She stopped. Tapped again. Talk. A hollow sound. Distinct. Not the dull resonance of thick sound wood, but the tight, bright echo of empty space behind a thin surface. She sat very still for a moment. Her heart was doing something it had not done in weeks, moving quickly. She tapped around the hollow area. It was confined to a rectangle about 2 feet wide and 1 foot high. Deliberate dimensions. Not a gap in the construction or a section of rotted wood. a deliberate space. She retrieved her father's hammer. She used the flat face first, tapping gently along the edges of the rectangle, searching for the seam. It was there. Hairline thin. You would never see it. You would only feel it if you knew what you were looking for. She inserted the claw of the hammer into the seam at the bottom edge and pried gently. The wood resisted, not because it was swollen or stuck with age. It resisted because it was fitted. Precisely and intentionally fitted, joined with a skill that her father would have stopped to examine and admired out loud. This was not a rough field modification. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing had built this false wall. She pried harder. A hidden wooden peg snapped. Then another. The panel shifted. She worked her fingers into the gap and pulled. The entire section came away in her hands. One piece, smooth on both faces. The back of it fitted with the same precision as the front, the joins cut at angles that locked everything tight until the pegs broke. Behind it was a space, dark, about 18 inches deep, the width and height of the panel itself. And in that space, sitting quietly in the dark where it had sat for 11 years, was a small strongbox. Iron, not steel. Older make. Bound with straps of black leather that had dried and cracked but held. No keyhole. A complex latch mechanism, the kind that required you to know the sequence to open it. She sat looking at it for a while. It was heavy when she lifted it, heavier than the size suggested. She set it on the boot floor in the shaft of light from the open hatch. She worked the latch for 10 minutes, trying combinations, feeling for the sequence the way her father had taught her to feel for the correct position of a stubborn bolt. Patience, not force. Listen to the mechanism. It will tell you where it wants to go. It told her. A final click. The lid sprang open. The setting sun was at exactly the right angle to pour through the open hatch and illuminate the contents. Gold light on dark green paper. Stacks of United States banknotes bundled in twine, neat as anything. And resting on top of the money, a slim book bound in dark leather. She lifted the book first. She opened it. The first page was a handwritten note. The ink had faded to rust brown with time. The script was careful and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who did not write often, but wrote seriously when he did. To whoever finds this. My name is Jonas Pruitt. I drove the stage for the Overland Line, Virginia City Division for 17 years. What is in this box is my life savings, $4,000. But the book is the more important thing. On June 12, 1867, I carried the men listed in this manifest from the Carson River Basin into the Eastern Territory. They were not regular passengers. I was hired special paid double and told to ask no questions. 12 miles east of Mackay Flat, we passed what remained of a Paiute encampment. It was still burning. The men in my coach had done it. They said so among themselves without lowering their voices. They saw no reason to lower their voices in front of a hired driver. There were no survivors. Women. Children. I drove them the rest of the way. I took the money. I quit the line the following month and I never drove again. One of the men in my coach that day is now a senator of this territory. He is running for the United States Senate. His name is Harlan Vane. I could not go to the law. The law in this territory is his law. I could not go to the papers. He owns 2 of them. I hid this here in the last coach I ever drove. The money is for you, for finding it, for the trouble that knowing it will bring. Use it to build a good life. The manifest is for the truth. What you do with it is your burden now. Godspeed. J. Pruitt. July 1867. Calla sat very still. The storm had died down outside. The orange light had softened to gold. Somewhere in the distance a nighthawk was calling. She read the letter again. Then she turned to the manifest. 5 names, written in the same careful hand. A date. A route, the coach number, the names of the stations at either end. Everything recorded with the precision of a man who understood that a record only serves its purpose if it is complete. She read the first name, Senator Harlan Vane. She read it the way you read something you already know, the way the cold had already moved along her spine back in Roland's parlor when she read the same name on the deed of sale. She had not known why then. She knew now. Harlan Vane and Associates had purchased her father's forge, Roland Vane's cousin. The man who was running for the United States Senate on the strength of his reputation as a pioneer of character and vision. She held the manifest in both hands and looked at it for a long time. $4,000 in the box beside her. A fortune. Enough to leave. Enough to go somewhere no one knew her name and start over entirely. Enough to buy a proper house in a proper town and never think about this again. She looked around the interior of the boot. At the false panel leaning against the side wall. At the expert joinery on its back face. At the hidden pegs that someone had fitted with such care. She thought about Jonas Pruitt. 17 years driving the stage, and then one day in June of 1867, he had carried 5 men into the Eastern Territory, and his life had divided into before and after. He had not gone to the law. He had not gone to the papers. He had taken his life savings and built a box and hidden it in a wall and driven to the end of his route and never driven again. He had held this for 8 years, until 1875, until he died. She thought about her father, about the way Edmund Marsh had kept his ledgers. Every contract recorded, every delivery confirmed, every transaction documented, because a man's word recorded in ink was more honest than a man's word in the air, and the world worked better when people kept honest records. She looked at the manifest. Then she looked at the money. She placed the manifest back on top of the notes. She closed the lid of the strongbox. She fitted the false panel back into place, working the broken pegs into position as best she could so it held, and she sat back on her heels in the growing dark of the rear boot. Not yet. Not tonight. The first step was not justice, not revenge. The first step was the same as it had always been. The first step was to build. She climbed out of the boot and stood in the cooling desert air with the strongbox under her arm. The storm had left the sky scrubbed clean, and the stars were appearing one by one in the vast dark above her. The stagecoach stood solid on its 3 good wheels and its one collapsed corner listing slightly to the left. Not for much longer. She walked around to the leeward side, knelt down, and pressed her hand flat against the alkali earth. Dry. Firm. She measured 3 paces from the left front wheel mount and dug. Not deep, just enough. Flat stones from the creek bank to line the hole. The strongbox placed inside. More stones on top. Earth tamped back down. A piece of old board laid flat over the spot. She stood up. She brushed the dust from her hands. $4,000. Jonas Pruitt's life savings. Hidden again. But not forever this time. Not buried for loneliness and fear and the impossible weight of having no one to trust. Just until she was ready. She looked up at the sky. The Milky Way was fully visible now, the whole sweep of it impossible and humbling. Her father used to take her outside on clear nights when she was small, and they would look at it together without talking because some things were too large for words, and Edmund Marsh had known which things those were. She thought about what she had just read. She thought about Harlan Vane's name in the newspaper, running for federal office, being called a man of the West, a builder, a figure of integrity and vision. She thought about Hazel. She did not know Hazel yet. She did not know that Jonas Pruitt had a daughter, or that she lived in P.O., or that she had spent 3 years trying to understand why her father had spent the last years of his life carrying the face of a man who had set something down that was too heavy to lift again. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew what was written in the book, and she knew what her father would have said. A record is only as useful as the place you keep it. Keep it somewhere safe. Keep it somewhere honest. And keep it somewhere that does not depend entirely on you still being alive. She had not done that yet, but she would. She picked up the hammer from where she had set it on the step of the coach, wrapped it in the wool scarf, placed it back in the satchel. She looked at the coach. 1 broken wheel, dry wood, rusted fittings, a false wall that needed to be repegged properly. She had work to do. She went to bed in her lean-to under the cold Nevada sky and slept the deep, sudden sleep of a woman who has found something to do with her hands and her mind and the particular quiet fury that had been building in her chest for the last 12 years. Tomorrow she would walk into P.O. She would find a wheelwright. She would start. The Iron Witness, Part 2. The Weight of the Dead. August. Brierly did not want to help her. He made that clear in the first 30 seconds. He was standing in the doorway of his workshop on Cartwright Lane, a narrow building that smelled of sawdust and hot iron and decades of serious work, and he looked at Calla Marsh the way old men who have seen too many young people make expensive mistakes tend to look at young people who are about to make expensive mistakes. Arms crossed, jaw set, eyes that had decided before she opened her mouth. "That wreck on the flat," he said. "Yes. That's firewood. The hub is sound. The iron tire is salvageable. I need seasoned hickory for 12 spokes and 4 new fellows of white oak." Silence. He had not expected that. The terminology, the specificity. Most people who came to August Brierly with wheel problems said things like, "The round part is broken" or "the wooden bit is no good." They did not stand in his doorway and quote him materials and dimensions before he had asked a single question. He looked at her hands. Work roughened, calloused in the places that come from tools, not domestic work. The heel of the right palm, the first 2 fingers of the left. "Hickory's dear," he said, testing. "I know what it's worth." She quoted him a price, a fair one, the kind of price that came from knowing the market, not from guessing. Something shifted in August Brierly's face. Not warmth exactly, more like the recalibration of a man who has just realized he is looking at a different thing than he thought he was looking at. "Who taught you?" he said. "My father, Edmund Marsh. He ran a forge in Carson City." August was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped back from the doorway. "I knew Edmund Marsh," he said. "Come in." That was how it started. August did not do the work for her. He was clear about that too. He was 70 years old and his hands still worked, but they worked on his schedule on his projects for his reasons, and not to fix the romantic mistakes of young women with more confidence than sense. What he would do, he said this standing at his workbench with his back to her already pulling a piece of hickory down from the rack, was allow her the use of his shop and his tools. And when she was doing something wrong, he would tell her. That was all. "That's all I need," Calla said. "You'll need more than that." "Probably. But that's all I'm asking for." He handed her the hickory without looking at her. "Start with the spoke blanks. I want to see how you split." She split the hickory, clean and straight, following the grain the way her father had shown her, because wood that is split with the grain is 3 times stronger than wood that is sawn across it, and the difference matters when the spoke is the thing standing between a loaded coach and a collapsed wheel on a mountain road. August watched from across the shop without appearing to watch. She could feel his attention the way you feel sun through a window. Present. Assessing. He didn't say anything for 20 minutes. Then he said "not bad," which she would come to understand was August Brierly's version of very good. She came to the shop every day for 2 weeks. She walked the 5 miles into Pio in the early morning before the heat built, worked through the day, and walked back in the evening. She learned the rhythms of Cartwright Lane and the rhythms of Pio itself, which was a town that operated at 2 speeds simultaneously. The frantic speed of the silver boom, the stamp mills running day and night, new claims being staked and abandoned and restaked, men arriving on every freight wagon with tools and ambition and leaving 6 months later with neither. And underneath that, slower and more permanent, the speed of the people who had decided to stay, the merchants, the tradespeople, the families who had built something that could not be loaded back onto a wagon. Nora Gett belonged to the second kind. She ran the boarding house on the east side of Main Street, a 2-story building that was better maintained than anything else on the block, with window boxes that managed to produce actual flowers, despite the altitude and the dust. She was somewhere between 45 and 60, the kind of woman whose exact age was impossible to determine because she had always looked exactly like herself, the same blunt competence in her face at every stage of it. She had heard about the young woman fixing up the old wreck on the Alkali Flat. Everyone in Pio had heard about it by the end of the first week. She appeared at Calla's camp on a Thursday with a covered pot of beef stew and no explanation. "You need to eat," she said, setting the pot on the step of the coach. "I have food." "You have beans." That was accurate. Calla had been living predominantly on beans and the occasional piece of salt pork for 11 days. "Thank you," Calla said. Nora looked at the coach, at the cleared land around it, at the small, precise camp Calla had made against the sheltered side, everything organized and purposeful. She looked for a long moment without speaking. Then she nodded once with the air of someone confirming a decision they had already made. "I'll come back Thursday," she said. And she did. Every Thursday. with stew or bread or once a jar of preserved peaches that Calla ate slowly over 4 days because they were extraordinary and she wanted them to last. Nora never stayed long. She would set down whatever she had brought, look at the progress, ask 1 or 2 direct questions, and leave. She was not performing generosity. She was performing something quieter than that, a kind of witness, an acknowledgement that the work was real and the person doing it was worth the acknowledgement. Calla found she needed that more than the stew, which surprised her. She had spent 7 years in Roland Vane's house learning to need nothing from anyone, learning to take up as little space as possible, learning to live so quietly inside her own existence that she barely disturbed the air around her. She had thought she was good at it. She had thought she had made herself sufficient. But there was something about a person showing up on a Thursday with a covered pot of stew that undid things she had not known were wound so tight. She did not cry. She was not going to cry about stew. She was a grown woman, and she had survived considerably worse than a shortage of protein. But it meant something. She let it mean something. The wheel was finished on a Tuesday in late October. Calla had fitted the last spoke the evening before, checking the angle twice against the bevel gauge, running her thumb along the join to feel for any gap. There was none. August had watched from his stool with his arms crossed and his expression neutral, which by this point she understood to mean he was pleased. "Your father taught you well," he said when she set the finished wheel down on the floor of the shop. "He taught me everything." "He taught you most things. You learned the rest yourself." She looked at him. "There's a difference. There's always a difference. What someone teaches you is a beginning. What you do with it is yours." She thought about that on the walk back to the flat that evening. The sky was going orange and purple behind the mountains, the air sharp with the particular clarity of high desert in fall. She thought about Edmund Marsh and his forge, about how he had shown her the same task a dozen times, and the 13th time he had stood back with his hands in his pockets and watched her do it without saying a word. Not because he was done teaching, because he wanted her to discover what came after teaching. She understood that now. 11 years later, standing in the Nevada desert, better late than not at all, August and Clem Doherty helped her transport the wheel back to the flat and fit it to the axle. It was a production. It required a system of levers and a borrowed jack, and a great deal of precise instruction from August delivered in the tone of a man who will not repeat himself, and a great deal of muscle from Clem, who had arrived with the jack without being asked, because Nora had told him what day the wheel was being fitted, and Clem Doherty had the particular quality of some quiet men, which is that they show up without announcement exactly when they are needed. When the wheel was on, and the coach stood level on all 4 wheels for the first time in however many years it had been sitting on 3, something happened that Calla had not expected. She had to look away, just for a moment, just long enough to blink hard and breathe. The coach stood square and proud on the pale alkali flat under the enormous Nevada sky. It was still paint-stripped and worn and very much a restoration in progress, but it was standing, upright, on its own 4 wheels. Something that had been broken was not broken anymore. She was not going to cry about a wheel either. She was not. August noticed and said nothing, which was the kindest possible thing. Clem noticed and handed her a tin cup of water from his canteen, which was the second kindest possible thing. She drank the water. She looked at the coach. "All right," she said. "Let's talk about the interior panels." The man in the black vest arrived on a Wednesday. Calla was at August's shop when it happened. She did not see him arrive. She did not know he was in P.O. at all, until she walked back to Nora Get's boarding house to return a borrowed pot, and found Nora standing in the front doorway with an expression Calla had not seen on her face before. Nora's face was usually uncomplicated. She thought something, she looked like she was thinking it. She felt something, her face registered it clearly. She was not a woman who invested energy in concealment. This face was different. This was the face of someone who had filed something away carefully and was deciding how to present it. "A man was asking about your coach today," Nora said. "What man?" "Came in on the morning stage, black vest, no luggage beyond a saddlebag. Said he was investigating a property matter for the Overland Stage Line successor company. Something about unclaimed rolling stock." Calla kept her face still. What did he want to know? Whether the coach on the Alkali Flat was the same one that ran the Virginia City division. Whether anyone knew its history, whether anyone had found anything in it when they took possession. found anything. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know anything about the coach's history, and that the woman who owned it was a young woman who'd bought the land fair and legal and minding her own business. Nora paused. Then I mentioned it to half the people I saw for the rest of the afternoon. Why? Because a man who asks questions that careful is not asking on behalf of a stage line. Stage lines send lawyers with papers. They don't send men in black vests who don't ask for a receipt for their lunch. Calla looked at her for a moment. You're very observant. I run a boarding house. It's the same skill. His name was Orrin Slate. She found that out the next morning from Clem, who had seen him eating breakfast at the counter of the Pio Hotel and had asked around. Orrin Slate. No permanent address on record. Paid in cash. Had been seen twice in the past month in the town of Mackay, which was 40 miles east. Which was close to where the Carson River Basin sat, if you knew the territory. Which Calla now did. She had read Jonas Pruitt's letter 7 times. She asked 3 more questions quietly over the next 2 days without appearing to be asking anything. She was good at appearing not to be doing what she was doing. 7 years in Roland Vane's house had made her very good at that. What she found out was this. Orrin Slate did not work for any stage company, current or defunct. He did not work for any law office. He had no sheriff's appointment, no federal commission, no legal standing that anyone in Pio could identify. He had been in Mackay the previous month asking similar questions about rolling stock from the old overland line. And the only person in Nevada with any clear interest in the history of that particular coach on that particular route in June of 1867 was a man whose name Calla had now read so many times it had stopped looking like a name and started looking like a fact. Senator Harlan Vane, running for the United States Senate, the good pioneer, the builder, the man of integrity and vision. She stood at the window of August's shop that evening after August had gone home, and she looked at the tools hanging on the wall in the last light. Hammers and chisels and draw knives and spoke shaves, each one in its place, each one for a specific purpose. Her father's voice. Every tool has one honest purpose. Use it for that. Don't ask a hammer to do what a chisel was made for. She had a strong box under a floor. She had a manifest with 5 names. She had a dead man's savings and a dead man's testimony and a living man who was looking for both. She thought about what Edmund Marsh would have said. Then she thought about what Edmund Marsh would have done. She went back to work. Slate came to find her on a Friday morning. She was in the coach's passenger compartment fitting a new piece of leather to the center bench seat when she heard the sound of a horse on the flat road. She did not look up. She waited. She heard the horse stop. She heard boots on the hard ground. A knock on the door frame, which was polite enough. She looked up. He was perhaps 50. Gray at the temples. The black vest fitted well, the kind of fitted that came from having it made rather than bought off a rack. His face was the face of a man who had made a profession of being agreeable, smooth, and pleasant on the surface with something else entirely underneath. He smiled when she looked at him. The smile did not reach his eyes. Nothing reached his eyes. Miss Marsh, he said, forgive the intrusion. My name is Orrin Slate. I'm conducting an inquiry on behalf of interests related to the Overland Stage Line. The line hasn't run in years. There are successor interests, property matters, you understand. He looked past her into the coach's interior. His eyes moved over it the way a prospector's eyes move over a creek bed, systematically, looking for something specific. Lovely restoration. You've done remarkable work. Thank you. This is the coach that ran the Virginia City Division. Line number 47. Not a question. He already knew. I bought the land, Calla said. The coach was on it. Of course. I'm not disputing your deed. He smiled again. Same smile. I'm simply inquiring whether you found anything in the coach when you took possession. Documents, personal effects, any kind of container that might have been stored in the vehicle. She looked at him, directly, without hurrying. The coach was empty when I arrived, she said. I can show you the interior if you'd like. And she could. She had thought about this. The strongbox was under the floor of the coach, yes, but the floor looked as it always had, and no man who had not already found the false panel in the boot would know where to look, and the false panel was repegged and flush and coated now with the same linseed oil treatment she had used on every other surface. Slate looked at her for a moment. "That won't be necessary," he said. "All right. If you do come across anything, any kind of stored item, you'd want to report it promptly. Depending on the nature of the property, there may be legal obligations." "I understand obligations," Calla said. "I'm sure you do." He held her gaze for 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then he smiled a third time. "Thank you for your time, Miss Marsh." He turned and walked back to his horse. She watched him go. She did not move until the sound of the hoofbeats had faded completely. Then she sat down on the bench seat and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed. Her hands were not shaking. She checked specifically. They were not. Good. She picked up the leather piece and the awl and went back to work. She was at August's shop the following Monday when the woman appeared in the doorway. Calla saw her before August did, 50-ish, strong-boned face with the weathered quality of someone who had spent years outdoors. Dark hair gone mostly gray, pinned back practically. Work dress good quality but not new. She stood in the doorway looking at Calla with an expression that was complicated. Not threatening, not hostile. Something that contained too many things at once, like a room where several conversations had been happening simultaneously. "I'm looking for Calla Marsh," the woman said. "You found her." The woman looked at her for a moment. "My name is Hazel Pruitt. My father was Jonas Pruitt." The shop was very quiet. August had stopped what he was doing at his bench. He was looking at his hands. Calla set down her spokeshave. "Let's step outside," she said. They sat on the bench outside the shop door, the two of them in the pale October sunlight, with the sound of Pio going about its business on the street in front of them. Hazel Pruitt sat with her hands in her lap and her back very straight, the posture of a person holding themselves together by sheer deliberate effort. "Nora Gett told me you might know something," Hazel said. "A man came asking about my father's old coach, the coach he drove before he quit the line. She told me my father quit driving in the summer of 1867. He never explained why. He had driven since before I was born. He loved it. He used to say the road was the only honest place in Nevada." She paused. "After he quit, he was different. Not unhappy exactly. More like a man carrying something heavy, something he couldn't set down." Calla listened. "He died in 1875, 3 years ago. Before he died, he said something to me that I haven't stopped thinking about since." Hazel looked at her hands. "He said the thing I put away will find the right person to receive it. I didn't know what he meant. I still don't. But when this man Slate started asking questions about that coach," she stopped. "I thought someone should know about my father, that he was a good man, that whatever he did or didn't do, he spent the last years of his life trying to carry it right." Calla was quiet for a moment. 8 years. Jonas Pruitt had carried this for 8 years. From July of 1867 until he died in 1875. Every day of those 8 years, knowing what he knew, holding what he held, living in the particular solitude of a man whose conscience is too full to share and too heavy to set down. She thought about the letter, the careful script, the deliberate records. Not a coward. A man without the right tools. There was a difference. Edmund Marsh had understood that difference. Some men fail because they won't. Some men fail because the world has not yet given them what they would need to succeed. You do not judge both kinds the same way. "Your father was a good man," Calla said. "I know that for certain." Hazel looked at her. "The coach was not empty when I found it," Calla said. She told her. Not everything. Enough. She told her about the false wall and the strongbox and the letter. She told her about the manifest. She told her the name that was on it. Hazel sat very still through all of it. When Calla finished, the silence lasted a long time. "He carried all of that," Hazel said finally. Not a question. A statement being absorbed. A thing being understood for the first time after years of almost understanding. "Yes." "And he put it in the coach." "Yes." So someone would find it. Someone who knew what it was and what to do with it. Hazel looked at the street in front of them, at the ordinary business of Pio going past, freight wagons and horses and men walking fast, and the smell of sawdust and coal smoke that were the permanent scent of a working town. Then she turned back to Calla. "My father knew a federal judge," she said. "A man in San Francisco, the Honorable Clement Ord. He worked the circuit through Nevada when my father was still driving. My father said he was the only man in the federal system he had ever trusted. He still corresponds with him, actually, with Judge Ord's clerk, asking after his health." She paused. "I wrote last Christmas. He remembered my father clearly." Calla looked at her. This was the thing she had needed. Without knowing, she was looking for it. A name. A face outside the territory. Someone beyond the reach of the man whose name was first on the manifest. "I need a few days," Calla said. "I know. I need to think carefully about what I do next, where I send it and how. Once it leaves my hands, it has to be somewhere it can't be buried." "I understand. And you need to understand that if Slate comes to you, Slate can ask all the questions he wants," Hazel said with a quietness that was very clear. "My father drove for that line for 17 years. I don't know anything about any strongbox." She said it the way you say something you have already decided, not the way you say something you are deciding right now. Calla looked at her. This woman she had not known 3 hours ago. This woman with her dead father's careful eyes, and her back straight as a plumb line, and her hands in her lap like something waiting to be useful. "All right," Calla said. And it was. The newspaper arrived on a Thursday. Clem Doherty brought it out with him when he stopped by on his afternoon run, tossed it onto the step of the coach without ceremony. The Pio Weekly Courier. 2 weeks old, come up from Carson City. He did not say anything about it. He just set it down and drank his coffee and talked about the condition of the road east of the creek crossing. After he left, Calla picked it up. Page 3, column 4. Beneath a notice about the new assay office and above an advertisement for Dr. Hammond's lung tonic. Senator Harlan Vane announces federal campaign. She read it standing in the doorway of the coach with the afternoon light coming in at a low angle. The language was what she expected. Service to the territory, vision for the future, a commitment to the principles that had made the West great, the values of the pioneer spirit, a life dedicated to building something lasting from the raw material of the land. She read it twice. She folded the newspaper. She sat down on the step and held the folded paper in both hands and looked at the flat, pale earth in front of the coach for a long time. Senator Harlan Vane was going to Washington. Unless the manifest in the strong box under the floor 2 feet behind her made it to the right hands before November. Unless Judge Clement Ord in San Francisco received a carefully copied document with a covering letter and decided it was worth pursuing. Unless the truth that Jonas Pruitt had sealed into a wall in 1867 traveled far enough and fast enough to matter before the votes were counted. She thought about that. She thought about how slow the mail was, about how many things could happen to a letter between Pio and San Francisco, about what Orrin Slate would do if he found out she was corresponding with a federal judge. Then Slate came back. She heard the horse before she saw him. Early morning. She was in the boot fitting a new iron bracket to the luggage frame when the shadow fell across the open hatch. She climbed out. He had 2 men with him this time. They stood slightly behind him and to the sides, not doing anything. Just present in the particular way of men who are there to be noticed. He was not smiling today. "Miss Marsh, I apologize for coming back, but I've received some additional information regarding the property status of this vehicle." "All right." Under the terms of the original charter of the Overland Stage Line, all rolling stock and associated property, including any contents found within rolling stock at the time of cessation of service, remain the legal property of the line's successor entity. Which is to say, he stopped, straightened slightly. If there is anything in this coach that was in this coach when the line stopped running, it belongs to the successor company, not to whoever purchased the land it was sitting on. Calla looked at him, then at the 2 men. Then back at him. "I've told you," she said. "The coach was empty when I arrived." "You've told me that, yes." "Then I'm not sure what else there is to discuss. There's the matter of verification." "What kind of verification?" "A search of the property." The air between them went very still. She had planned for this. Not for it being today, not for it being this morning, with the bracket iron still in her hand and the boot open behind her. But she had planned for the fact of it. She knew what was under the floor, and she knew how well she had hidden it. And she knew that a search of the property would find a restored Concord coach with new leather benches and fresh linseed oil on the panels, and not one single thing that looked like it had been there for 11 years. "Do you have a warrant?" she said. He blinked. "This is not a criminal matter." "Then you're standing on private property asking me to agree to a search I am not legally required to agree to." She kept her voice even. "I don't agree." The two men behind him did not move, but something shifted in the quality of their stillness. Slate looked at her for a long moment. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said, quietly, almost gently. "I bought this land fair and legal," Calla said. "I paid the filing fee, and I have the deed, and I have the right to stand on my own property and ask a man without a warrant to leave it." Silence. A long silence. The kind that contains a calculation. "I'll be in town a while longer," Slate said. "That's your right," she said. "Pio's a free town." He looked at her one more time. Then he turned his horse and rode back down the flat road toward Pio. The two men rode behind him. She waited until they were small in the distance. Then she went back into the boot, picked up the bracket iron, and sat down on the floor. Her hands were not shaking. She checked. They were not. But her heart was moving at a pace that had nothing to do with the work. She had 3 days, maybe 4. Before Slate found another angle, a legal maneuver, a cooperative local official, something. She did not know what he would try next. She knew only that he would try something. Men like Orrin Slate did not ride away from a question they had been paid to answer. She needed to move faster. She needed to copy the manifest, carefully and completely. She needed to write to Judge Ord in San Francisco. She needed to get 3 copies of the truth into 3 places where Orrin Slate and Senator Harlan Vane and every successor entity in the territory could not reach all 3 of them at once. She needed to do all of this before Slate found his warrant. She put the bracket iron down. She picked up the hammer. She sat in the rear boot of the coach that Jonas Pruitt had last driven in the summer of 1867. And she thought about the dead man's letter, the careful script, the deliberate records. "I could not go to the law. They are his law, not hers." She was 24 years old, and she had $87 and a piece of cracked alkali flat and a hammer her father had made for her hands and the name of a federal judge in San Francisco. It was enough. It was going to have to be. The Iron Witness, Part 3. What she chose to build. She did not sleep that night, not because she was frightened, or not only because of that. She sat in the restored interior of the coach with the door open to the cold desert air and the manifest in her lap, and she let herself think. Really think. The way her father had taught her to think before starting a complicated piece of work, which was slowly and completely and without hurrying toward the answer. The stars were out. All of them. The full impossible sweep of the Milky Way across a sky so dark it had weight to it. She thought about Jonas Pruitt. Jonas. He had sat in a box like this one. Not this coach, or maybe this exact coach, she would never know for certain, but one exactly like it. He had sat in the driver's box above her head with the reins in his hands, and he had driven 5 men through the eastern Nevada territory, and he had passed a burning camp, and he had heard what those men said, and he had kept driving, because that was the job, because stopping was not an option, because the road does not pause for what happens on either side of it. And then he had gone home, and he had not been able to put it down. 8 years. He had carried it for 8 years. Not because he was weak, not because he was waiting, because he did not have the tools. The law was Vane's law. The papers were Vane's papers. A man like Jonas Pruitt, a hired driver with no money and no connections, and nothing but his own conscience, had exactly one option available to him. Hide it, and trust the road to carry it to someone who could use it. She looked down at the manifest in her lap. He had trusted right. She was not Jonas Pruitt. She was not going to spend 8 years hiding this and hoping. She was 24 years old, and she had a dead man's testimony and a living man's corruption and a window of time that was closing. Slate would find his angle. Men like Slate always found their angle. What she needed to do was move faster than he could. Not loudly. Not publicly. Not in a way that could be intercepted or discredited or buried. Quietly. Precisely. Like a joint fitted with hidden pegs. She knew what she was going to do. She had known since Hazel said the name Judge Clement Ord. She just needed to do it right. She started before dawn. She had bought good paper in P.O. the previous week, ostensibly for keeping records of her construction work, which was true. It was just not the only use she had in mind. She had bought 2 good pens and a bottle of iron gall ink, the kind that did not fade, the kind that would still be readable in 50 years. She set the lantern on the bench seat, and she opened the manifest to the first page, and she began to copy. She wrote slowly. She wrote every word, every name, every date, the route designation, the coach number, the station names at either end. She wrote Jonas Pruitt's letter in full exactly as he had written it, preserving his phrasing and his punctuation, and even the places where his pen had pressed harder than usual, which she could feel under her fingertip but could not replicate, so she simply kept his words. She made 3 copies. It took her until the sky began to lighten in the east. 3 complete copies of everything in the strongbox, laid out on the bench seats to dry, careful not to let the pages touch. She looked at them in the early gray light. 12 pages each. 36 pages of Jonas Pruitt's testimony. 36 pages of a dead man finally being heard. She made the pouches herself. She had leather scraps left from the bench seat restoration. Good leather. Supple. The same quality Jonas would have handled every day for 17 years. The reins and harnesses and bootstraps of a working coach line. She cut 3 pieces to the same dimensions, and she stitched them with the saddle stitch her father had taught her. The one that did not pull loose when the thread broke because each stitch locked independently. She stitched slowly, carefully, the way you stitch something you want to last. Her father had taught her this too. The difference between work done quickly and work done right is usually just patience. And patience is just attention that doesn't get bored. She slipped each copy into its pouch, folded the top over, stitched it closed. 3 identical pouches, 3 copies of the same truth. She held them in her hands for a moment. Then she went to find Hazel. Hazel Pruitt lived on the north end of P.O. in a small house with a kitchen garden that was better tended than anything else on the street. She opened the door before Calla knocked, which meant she had been watching for her, which meant she had not slept either. They sat at the kitchen table with the pouches between them. "Judge Ord," Calla said. "Yes." "You trust him." "My father trusted him. My father trusted almost no one. I'm going to send him a copy with a covering letter. I'll write it today." She paused. "I need you to be the one who posts it." Hazel looked at her. "Because if Slate is watching you, he's watching me. I don't know if he's watching you." "He's not. I've been careful. Can you get to the post office in Mackay? My cousin runs freight out there on Fridays. Today was Wednesday. 2 days. 2 days, Hazel confirmed. Calla set one of the pouches on the table between them. "This one goes to San Francisco. Judge Ord, Hazel." She stopped, looked at this woman she had known for less than 2 weeks, this woman with her dead father's eyes and her straight back and her steady hands. "If anything happens to me before this goes out, nothing is going to happen to you. But if it does, then I'll send it myself." Hazel's voice was very quiet. "And I'll send the other 2 as well." Calla looked at her. "You said 3 copies," Hazel said. "Where are the other 2 going?" "One stays with me." She set the second pouch on the table. "The third," she paused. "I need somewhere to put the third that has nothing to do with either of us." They were both quiet for a moment. Then Hazel said, "Nora Gett is building an addition onto the north side of the boarding house. The framing goes up next week." Calla looked at her. "Walls have been keeping things safe since before either of us was born," Hazel said, with the faintest possible trace of something that was almost a smile. Calla picked up the third pouch. "I'll talk to Nora," she said. Nora did not ask many questions. That was one of the things Calla had come to understand about Nora Gett over the weeks of Thursdays and stew pots and brief, clear conversations. Nora was not incurious. She was selectively curious. She asked about things she could act on and left the rest alone. Calla showed her the pouch. She explained what was in it. Not in detail. Enough. Nora held it in both hands and looked at it for a long moment. "You're sure about this?" she said. "Yes." if someone comes looking. They'd have to tear down a wall, Calla said. And they'd have to know which wall. Nora looked at the pouch. Then she looked at Calla. The full, direct look of a woman who is deciding whether to trust something important, which is to say she was not deciding whether to trust Calla. She had already done that. She was deciding whether the weight of this was one she was willing to carry. She handed the pouch back. "I'll do it myself," she said. "No one else goes near that wall." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. My grandfather was a Paiute man." She said it simply, without drama, the way you say a fact that has always been true. "My mother's father. He died before I was born. I never knew him." She paused. "But I know what happened to people like him, in this territory, in 1867 and before and after." She looked at Calla steadily. "So don't thank me. This is not generosity." Calla held her gaze. "All right," she said. It was more than all right. It was the thing she had not known she was missing. Not just an ally, a reason. A living connection between the names in the manifest and the people those names had been attached to. A thread running from Jonas Pruitt's careful script to Nora Get's kitchen garden, from a burning camp in 1867 to a boarding house in P.O. in 1878, from the dead to the living, from the hidden to the almost known. She walked home in the late afternoon light. She felt lighter than she had in weeks. Not because the danger was over, it wasn't. Slate was still in P.O. and the warrant question was still unresolved, and Senator Harlan Vane was still announcing his federal campaign in newspapers across the territory. But the truth was no longer only hers. And that changed everything. Clem found her the next morning. He was sitting on the step of the coach when she came back from the creek with her water bucket's hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim. The way he turned his hat when he had something to say that he was not sure how to say. She set the buckets down. "Slate met with Roland Vane yesterday," Clem said. "Before Vane came out here." She went still. "What?" "I saw them. At the P.O. Hotel corner table. I was making a delivery next door. They were talking for near an hour. Roland Vane was in P.O. She had not known that. "What time did Slate leave the hotel?" she said. "About 2 in the afternoon. Vane left maybe 20 minutes after." Roland Vane had come to see her at approximately 3 o'clock, which meant Roland had gone from a meeting with Slate directly to her doorstep, which meant he had known before he came what Slate had found, or not found, which meant his visit had not been a coincidence of business travel. It had been reconnaissance. She thought about Roland's face when he had stood looking at the coach, the confusion on it, the genuine incomprehension of a man who had handed a girl $87 and expected her to disappear, and had instead found her standing in the middle of something he could not account for. She had read that as harmless, as the confusion of a small man confronting something larger than himself. She had been half right. He was confused, but he was also reporting back. "Did Slate tell him anything?" she said. "Could you hear?" "Some of it." Clem turned the hat again. "Slate told him he'd searched the property, that the coach was empty." Calla looked at him. "He lied to Roland." "Appears so." She thought about that. Slate had not found the strongbox. He knew he had not found it. He had told his employer's cousin that he had searched and found nothing, which meant one of two things. Either Slate was telling Roland what Roland wanted to hear, managing the situation, keeping Vane's name clean while he continued to work the problem quietly. Or Slate was not certain. He was not certain. That was it. He could not prove the strongbox existed, and he could not prove she had it, and he could not force a search without legal standing, and he could not get legal standing without drawing attention to why he wanted it. He was in the same trap Jonas Pruitt had been in, but from the other side. He needed to act, and every action available to him risked exposing the thing he was trying to protect. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "Thank you," she told Clem, "for telling me." He put his hat back on. "You want me to keep watching?" "Please." He nodded, got up, walked back to his wagon. She stood in the morning sunlight with the water buckets beside her and looked at the coach. Then she looked toward P.O. One more thing to do. She had been putting it off, not from fear, from the desire to do it right, to not walk into it without being ready, without having everything in place first. Everything was in place. She went to find Orrin Slate. She found him at the P.O. Hotel, not in the dining room. On the front porch in one of the wooden chairs, reading a newspaper in the late morning light, with the air of a man who is waiting and has decided to wait comfortably. He saw her coming from half a block away. She saw him see her. Neither of them changed pace. She climbed the 2 steps to the porch. She pulled the other chair around to face his, and she sat down. He folded the newspaper. "Miss Marsh?" he said. "Mr. Slate?" He waited. She let him wait for a moment. Not long, just long enough. "You've been in P.O. for 2 weeks," she said. "You've spoken to people about the coach. You've come to my property twice. You've told Roland Vane the coach is empty." She paused. "You told him that because you're not certain. And you're not certain because you can't prove what you think you know." He looked at her without expression. "So here is what I want you to understand," she said. "Whatever was or wasn't in that coach when I arrived, whatever I did or didn't find, whatever you think is sitting somewhere on my property right now," she kept her voice absolutely level, "it is not only on my property, it is not in one place. It is in several places, in several forms, in the hands of several people who are not connected to each other in any way you can trace. And 2 of those places are entirely outside this territory." Silence. "If I am bothered," she said, "if my property is searched without legal warrant, if any person I trust is approached or threatened or inconvenienced, then the thing you are looking for will travel to exactly the people who can do the most with it." She paused. "And Senator Vane's campaign will become considerably more complicated." The air on the porch was very still. A wagon went past on the street below. Someone was hammering somewhere on the next block. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary town going about its business. Slate looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. She did not move. She sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight and waited for whatever he was going to say. He said nothing. He picked up his newspaper. He unfolded it. He began to read. She stood up. She walked down the porch steps and back onto the street, and she did not look back. He was gone by Friday. Clem confirmed it. The morning stage east before dawn. Slate and both his men's saddlebags loaded, no announcement, no forwarding address. The P.O. hotel manager told Clem they had settled their bill in full and in cash and left a generous tip, which was the behavior of men who did not intend to come back and wanted to leave, no reason for anyone to remember them unkindly. Calla was sanding the exterior panels of the coach when Clem came out to tell her. She kept sanding. "Gone," Clem said. "Good. You going to tell me what you said to him?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. "You going to be all right?" "I'm going to be fine." She looked up from the panel. "Thank you, Clem, for all of it." He shrugged with the practiced discomfort of a man who does not know what to do with gratitude. "Someone had to drive you out here." "Someone did. And someone brought wood, and someone said nothing when it mattered, and someone told me what I needed to know when I needed to know it." She held his gaze. "That's not nothing." He looked at his boots. "You're all right, Miss Marsh. So are you." He tipped his hat, walked back to his wagon, drove away. She went back to sanding. The letter from San Francisco arrived 6 weeks later. Hazel brought it out herself, walking the 5 miles from town on a cold December morning with the envelope held carefully inside her coat against her chest. She handed it to Calla without saying anything. Calla looked at it. The seal of the Federal Circuit Court of California pressed into dark wax at the back. The address in a clerk's careful hand. She opened it. It was from Judge Clement Ord's office, not from the judge himself. From his senior clerk, a man named Whitfield, writing on the judge's behalf. It was brief. It said that the materials received had been reviewed carefully, that they had been found to be of significant legal and historical relevance, that they were being retained securely in the court's archive pending further investigation, that the matter had been referred to the relevant federal oversight body, that Miss Marsh should expect no immediate correspondence and should continue with her ordinary affairs, which was the polite language of a legal office, for we have it, you can let go now. It said one more thing. It said, My employer asked me to convey that Jonas Pruitt's daughter should know her father was a man of courage and that his record is now in the permanent custody of the federal court where it cannot be tampered with, expunged, or denied. Calla read it twice. Then she folded it along its original creases and held it in her hands. Hazel was watching her. "It's done," Calla said. "Not finished. Not resolved. Done." There was a difference. The manifest was in federal custody. It could not be buried now. Not by Roland Vane, not by Orrin Slate, not by Senator Harlan Vane in his campaign and his vision for the West and his carefully constructed image of the good pioneer. It existed, officially, permanently. What would happen from here she did not know. Legal processes were slow and complicated, and the powerful had ways of avoiding consequences that ordinary people did not. She was not naive enough to believe that a manifest in a federal archive automatically meant justice in a courthouse. But it meant something. It meant the lie had an ending, even if that ending took years. Even if it outlasted Harlan Vane's career or his natural life. Even if justice came not to him but to the history books that would eventually record what had happened in the eastern Nevada Territory in June of 1867. The truth was out of the dark. That was what Jonas Pruitt had wanted. Not revenge, not even punishment necessarily. Witness. He had wanted someone to see it, to record it, to say this happened and these men did it and one of them went on to become a senator, and we know. We know now. Hazel pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at them. "He would have been glad," she said, quietly. "I think so. He would have—" She stopped, started again. "He used to say that a road isn't just a way from one place to another. It's a record of every person who walked it, every load that crossed it, every hard thing that happened on it." She paused. "He believed roads remembered." Calla thought about that. She thought about the coach on the alkali flat, the road it had traveled, the things it had carried, the 11 years it had sat with a secret sealed in its wall, waiting. Roads remember. "Yes," she said. "I think he was right about that." Roland Vane came back in January. She saw him from the driver's box where she had been sitting with her morning coffee watching the light come up over the mountains. A buggy on the flat road moving at the pace of a man who is not certain he wants to arrive. He was alone this time. No Slate, no associate, just Roland in his good coat with his collar turned up against the January cold, pulling the horse to a stop in front of the coach and sitting there for a moment before he climbed down. He looked different than she remembered. Smaller somehow. Not physically. Just in the quality of his presence. Roland Vane in his parlor in Carson City had been a man of absolute certainty, smooth and contained and radiating the particular confidence of someone who has never been seriously wrong about anything because he has arranged his life to avoid being tested. This man standing in the pale winter light in front of her restored coach looked like he had been tested recently, and knew it. She climbed down from the driver's box and stood in front of the coach and waited for him. He looked at the coach for a long time before he looked at her. She watched him take it in. The fresh linseed oil on the panels, amber in the winter light. The repaired wheels, all 4 of them true and sound. The window she had cut into the right side wall and fitted with real glass. The small addition she had built onto the coach's left side, incorporating it into the structure of her cabin so that the two were one building. Now the old and the new joined at the hip. He looked at the garden, bare and mulched for winter but orderly. The neat stack of firewood against the wall. The water barrels with their fitted lids. He looked at her. "Mabel," he said. He had always called her by her full name. She had always disliked it. "I heard you'd done well." "I have." He was quiet for a moment. "The forge was a fair transaction," he said. And then before she could respond, "I know that's not how it felt." She looked at him. "How did it feel to you?" He seemed to genuinely consider the question, which surprised her. Roland had never been a man who considered questions that put him at a disadvantage. "Necessary," he said finally. "At the time it felt necessary. And now," he looked away, toward the distant mountains. "Harlan is withdrawing from the Senate race," he said. There were some questions about certain business arrangements, old matters. He paused. He felt the timing was not right. She said nothing. I don't know what you did, Roland said, still looking at the mountains, or what you found, or who you spoke to. He turned back to her. But I know something happened, and I know it started here. She held his gaze. I bought a piece of land, she said, and I built something on it. Calla, you gave me $87 to be rid of me. That was the transaction. I think we both got what we paid for. He flinched. Small, but real. She had not expected that. She had expected the smooth surface to hold. She had expected him to absorb the words the way expensive upholstery absorbs impact without showing damage. But something had changed in Roland Vane between his last visit and this one. Some certainty had cracked. She did not know if it was guilt or fear, or simply the belated recognition that the world he had arranged so carefully around himself was not as stable as he had believed. She did not feel triumph. She had expected to feel triumph. Instead, she felt something quieter, something that was almost pity. Not the pity of condescension, the pity of recognizing someone who has spent their whole life building on sand and is only now beginning to feel the ground shift. Edmund would have been proud of you, Roland said. She blinked. It was the last thing she had expected him to say. Yes, she said after a moment. He would have. Roland nodded once. He climbed back into the buggy. He adjusted the reins. He did not say goodbye. He simply drove back down the flat road the way he had come, the buggy wheels leaving 2 clean lines in the pale January earth. She watched him go. She did not feel the need to watch until he disappeared. She turned away while he was still visible and walked back to the coach and picked up her coffee cup from the driver's box where she had left it. Cold now. She drank it anyway. August came out that afternoon. He arrived the way he usually arrived, unannounced, with a practical purpose disguised as a visit. Today, the practical purpose was a draw knife he had sharpened for her, which he handed over without ceremony before looking at the new window she had fitted into the coach's right panel. He examined the join between the window frame and the original wood for a long time, running his thumb along the seam, feeling for the quality of the fit. Tight, he said. I had a good teacher. You had a teacher who didn't let you get away with sloppy work. You did the rest yourself. She smiled. It was the same thing he had said after the wheel. He stepped back and looked at the coach overall, at the way the cabin addition flowed from the coach's left side, the roof lines marrying cleanly, the proportions working, at the whole thing standing solid and square and permanent on the pale alkali flat under the enormous winter sky. You know what your father would say about this? August said. What? He'd say the best restoration is one you can't see, the one where the new work is so clean you can't tell where the old ends and the new begins. She looked at the coach. He was right. She could not always see it herself anymore, the line between what had been broken and what she had fixed. The wheel she had built was as much a part of the coach now as the original hubs. The panels she had sanded and oiled were the same color as the ones that had been sheltered from the sun. The leather on the benches matched the tone of what had survived. The false wall in the boot was repegged and smooth and indistinguishable from the walls around it. It looked like it had always been this way, like it had never been a wreck. She thought about Jonas Pruitt's manifest sitting in the Federal Archive in San Francisco in its leather pouch. A copy of the truth preserved. Not hidden any longer, not buried. Preserved. There was a difference. Hidden meant afraid. Preserved meant intentional. Meant this matters enough to protect. Meant we are not done with this yet. August sat down on the step. He did it slowly, the way a 70-year-old man with good joints sits down when he has decided to stay for a while. Tell me something, he said. What? The manifest. He looked at his hands. The one with Vane's name on it. She went still. She had not told August about the manifest. She had not told August about the strongbox. She had not told August about any of it. She looked at him. He looked back at her steadily. I recognized a name, he said. When you showed me the copy, the 4th name, Emmett Crawl. She was very still. Emmett Crawl lives on the north side of Pio, August said. He runs the grain merchant, has for 12 years. I have known that man since he came to this town. He paused. I showed him the copy before I knew why you were showing it to me. I showed him just the names, asked if he recognized any of them. She was not breathing. He went white, August said. The color dropped out of his face like a candle being snuffed, and then he said very quietly that he did not know those names and he left my shop and he has not been back. Silence. One of the 5 men from the manifest, living in P.O. for 12 years. Not a senator, not a powerful man. A grain merchant on the north side of a silver boomtown in Nevada, living an ordinary life, selling feed and flour and oats, going to church on Sundays, knowing every person in the community by name, knowing what he had done, carrying it the way Jonas Pruitt had carried it, or not carrying it, setting it down somewhere she could not see, and walking away from it, and building a normal life on top of it, the way you build a floor over a crack in the foundation and pray no one ever looks too closely at the boards. She sat down on the step beside August. They were quiet for a long time. "What do I do with that?" she said. August was quiet for a moment. "What does the manifest say to do with it?" She thought about Jonas Pruitt's letter. "What you do with it is your burden now." "Nothing," she said. "It says nothing about what to do. It says what to do with the manifest itself, not with the people in it." "Then that's your answer," August said. "The manifest is where it belongs. The people in it are where they are. You don't carry what you've already put down." She looked at him. "You're a woman who built a home out of a wreck," he said, "on purpose. You chose this land. You chose this coach. You chose every nail." He paused. "You don't have to choose every consequence." She sat with that for a while. The sun was going down, going fast the way it went in winter, the light dropping from gold to orange to a deep blue that turned the mountains into silhouettes. The alkali flat caught the last of the color and held it pale pink at the edges, and the coach sat in the middle of it, casting a long shadow eastward. Emmett Crawl was in P.O. He knew she had the manifest. He knew because she had shown August, and August had shown him the names, and there was only one reason a young woman would be copying names out of an old stage line document and showing them to people in P.O. in the winter of 1878. He knew, and he had gone white, and he had left the shop, and he was living right now in his ordinary house on the north side of town, knowing that someone had found what Jonas Pruitt had hidden. Let him know. Let him live with that. The manifest was in San Francisco. It was in federal custody. It listed his name alongside Harlan Vane's and 3 others, and it stated clearly what they had done on June 12, 1867. It existed. It was real. It was not going away. She could not give the dead their lives back. She could not undo what had been done on the road east of Mackay Flat. She could not reach back through 11 years and give Jonas Pruitt the tools he needed to do what she had done. What she could do was what she had done. Build something solid. Build it on the truth. Build it so well that the new work and the old work were indistinguishable, and the thing that remained was something worth remaining. The sun finished setting. The stars came out one by one, then all at once, the way they always did in the high desert, as if they had been waiting for the light to clear. She sat for a while longer. Then she got up. She picked up the draw knife August had sharpened. She went inside. There was still work to do. She was 24 years old. She had $87 and a cracked piece of alkali flat, and a hammer her father had made for her hands, and a dead man's testimony, and the knowledge that the truth was now in 3 places where no one could reach it all at once. She had August, who told her the truth about her work without softening it, and meant it as respect. She had Hazel, who had walked 5 miles in December cold with a letter from San Francisco held against her chest like something precious because it was. She had Nora, whose grandfather had been a Paiute man, and who had slipped a leather pouch into a wall framing without ceremony, and would not speak of it to anyone, and would carry the weight of it the way she carried everything, steadily and without complaint. She had Clem, who had driven her out here in the first place, and had shown up with a jack without being asked, and had kept his eyes open when it mattered. She had not planned any of this. She had planned nothing except to survive. But somewhere between the buying of a broken coach and the building of a home, and the finding of a dead man's secret, and the choosing of what to do with it, she had built something she had not set out to build. Not just the cabin, not just the restored coach. Something made of people, trust, witness. The particular kind of community that forms not from proximity, but from the choice made repeatedly and at some cost to show up for each other. She sat that evening in the driver's box of the coach with her father's hammer in her lap and the cold desert air on her face, and the enormous Nevada sky above her, and she thought about Edmund Marsh. He had made her this hammer in 1866. 12 years ago, he had shaped the handle to her grip and balanced the head to her arm and handed it to her across the work table and told her she had a mind for how things fit together. He had not told her what things. He had left that for her to find out. She ran her thumb along the hickory handle. Smooth and dark with the oil of her own hands now, the wood changed by years of use into something that was partly hers. A tool made with love. She looked at the flat stretch of alkali earth in front of her, the garden bare and waiting for spring, the firewood stacked tight and dry, the light in her window warm and steady. Everything in her line of sight was something she had built or grown or mended. Everything in her line of sight was hers. She had come here with $87 and a broken wreck and a secret that didn't belong to her. She was leaving it, not leaving it. She was not leaving. She was staying. She was here. This was home. She was beginning it with all of that, and more than all of that. With Judge Ord's letter in her coat pocket. With Hazel's voice saying my father was a good man. With Nora's hands pressing flat on a table, not as a gesture, as a statement. With the knowledge that the road remembered. And the knowledge that she had learned finally after everything that a road is not just a way from one place to another. It is a record. And she was part of the record now. She and Jonas Pruitt. She and Edmund Marsh. She and the Concord coach that sat beneath her solid and restored and still for all its years of stillness, very much a vessel. Still carrying. Still moving something from one place to another. Not passengers. Not freight. Just the thing that mattered most, which was the truth, and the knowledge that someone had chosen to keep it. The stars were out, all of them. She sat in the driver's box of the old Stagecoach on the alkali flat outside Pio, Nevada in the winter of 1878, and she was 24 years old, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The hammer was warm in her hands. The night was very clear.